Final week of the NFL regular season was one where fans of the Houston Texans wouldn't mind losing. But they couldn't even get that right. Jordan Akins hauling in a late touchdown and a 2-point convert to give the Texans an improbable win over Indianapolis. The win, coupled with the Bears losing, sends the first overall pick to Chicago. It might be as surprised as anyone to have it. So, I mean, they get the win, but they don't get the win in terms of getting the first overall pick. It's the first time that the Bears have had the first overall pick since 1947. Texans get the second overall pick. Then it's Arizona, who are going to have a new head coach, setting their draft strategy. The Colts with the number 4 pick. Seattle rounds out the top 5, that pick coming over from Denver as part of that Russell Wilson trade. The first 18 picks, by the way, are set. Good news for Ryan Wilson. Mock drafts now have a core set of teams taking players. Here's his latest mock. Bears building around Justin Fields, going with some help defensively in Jalen Carter. The Texans get their franchise QB at number 2 with Bryce Young. Arizona goes with Will Anderson Jr. at 3. Indianapolis gets their quarterback and C.J. Stroud at the 4 spot. Seattle adds Clemson's Miles Murphy to their defensive line at 5. And just to note, Will Levis, 3rd quarterback taken inside the top 10. He goes to Vegas. For more on the mock and what teams may or may not do, let's bring back Rick Spielman and welcome in his podcast partner with the First Pick podcast partner, Ryan Wilson. This is more of a bludgeoning that occurs on this podcast. Is that what my understanding is?
No, I'm very nice to Ryan, and I appreciate his professionalism as we move forward through this horrendous first-time mock that we're going to talk about today.
Okay, so let's start then with the Bears, who surprisingly get the first pick. What are the chances, Rick, that the temptation is just too great and they trade out of that pick?
If I were the Chicago Bears, I'd be trading out and trying to get out of there as much as I can, because there's going to be teams this year that needs quarterbacks. This is compared to last year, there are quarterbacks that are worthy of the first overall pick this year. So someone's going to get aggressive, and Chicago needs much draft capital as they can get. Now, the thing that hurt Chicago a little bit was, I believe they lost the 2nd round pick for Claypool when they traded it to Pittsburgh, which would have been the first pick in the 2nd round, which is always valuable in the draft. So I do see them trying to bail out to take as much draft capital as they can, because they need help all over the offensive, defensive side of the balls.
Rick, you're not alone in not loving this mock draft. I had someone in the league text me last night, like at midnight, and say, listen, man, the Bears are not taking Jalen Carter at number 1 for basically the same reasons that you laid out. Jalen Carter's a great player. Will Anderson's a great player. But the Bears have a ton of needs. And if you can trade down even 3 or 4 or 5 spots and get some draft picks that allow you to even still perhaps get a Jalen Carter at 4 or 5 and then get some much needed offensive line help, that seems like the better course of action. You know what's going to be funny, Jeremy, is as we go through this process, there will be conversations about whether the Bears should stay with Justin Fields. Those seem like silly conversations to me, because Justin Fields basically carried that offense behind no offensive line. But hey, that's why we have draft season. But I think if I had to put a number on it, and Akeem Dermis mentioned this last night on HQ, he felt like 75% chance that the Bears get out of this pick, and that sounds about right. But as Rick will tell you, you need a trading partner. But as Rick just noted, unlike last year when only one quarterback went, and that was Kenny Pickett at number 20, there are going to be a lot of teams interested in quarterbacks, at least 3 of these quarterbacks, possibly in the top 5 to top 7, which is great news for a Chicago Bears team that would desperately, I would imagine, want to move off of that pick.
Well, and it's just building around Justin Fields just seems like the sensible thing to do at this point. But to your point, maybe the pick is just too valuable. You can get more capital at the end of the day if you trade it away. Okay, at 2, the Texans can get themselves another franchise quarterback with Bryce Young, at least in this mock draft. Is this a slam dunk selection for the Texans for you, Ryan?
For me, yeah, and I think Rick is on the same page, but he can tell me in a moment. I love everything about Bryce Young except for the fact that he's probably around 5'10", about 185, and that's where teams are going to be hesitant, and the teams that I spoke with always bring that up. That's their primary concern, and again, no surprise, and I say it all the time, if Bryce Young were 6'2", 220, we're not having this conversation, but he's not, and Rick and I have talked about this on the podcast. It is very rare that you see Bryce Young get a ball knocked down at the line of scrimmage. He plays much bigger than he appears when you see him in person, and he is routinely making the right decisions. Now, C.J. Stroud is going to be in this conversation based on the way he played last weekend, arguably his best game of his college career against Georgia, and I've had teams tell me he could be in the QB1 seat as well, and that's something that the Texans are going to have to determine at number 2, and the Texans are also going to have to do the math, Rick, on whether another team is going to leapfrog them for whichever quarterback they like in that trade down scenario with the Bears that we've talked about.
Yeah, and if I'm the Texans, I'm going to sit there and take the best quarterback if I have an option. If I like Stroud and I like Young, I would just sit there and let either of them fall to me if I'd be happy with either of them. If not, then you're going to have to worry about someone going up and jump. And everybody does talk about Bryce Young and how his size was going to come a factor. Can he stay healthy through a 17-game season, which he got banged up a little bit this year down in Alabama? But for him to go out and not opt out of that Sugar Bowl, and I got a chance to go see him play live again, and both times I've seen this kid play live, he does not play like a 5'10", 5'11" quarterback. He has uncanny vision. He is smooth at the position, as much savvy as you can have at the position. And I agree with Ryan. If he wasn't small, there would be no question that we'd be talking to him in the same vein that we talked about Trevor Lawrence.
And with some of the quarterbacks that have been drafted over the last couple of years, thinking of guys, like Tua, like a Trey Lance, guys who their durability, they've been injured for parts of the season, even Justin Fields to an extent. So size certainly could come into play in terms of how it factors into what a team decides to draft. One team that's celebrating today, certainly, the management of the Seattle Seahawks. Not only did they make the playoffs, they also secured a top 5 pick in the draft by virtue of that Russell Wilson trade with Denver. Ryan has them taking defensive lineman Myles Murphy. Are you confident if they go that way, Rick, that they're confident in what they have in Geno Smith?
Yeah, they have to address the defensive side of the ball. But, Ryan, I know we're going to talk about this in the podcast. I want to throw a little zinger out at you. I mean, Geno Smith's 32 years old, so I don't know how long his future is because he is an athletic quarterback that has to make plays with his legs. Knowing Seattle's personality and the way they draft, okay, I'm going to throw something at you that we haven't talked about or rehearsed. Let's say Anthony Richardson has an unbelievable pre-draft process, and they go with Anthony Richardson sitting behind Geno Smith for a couple of years and then go from there.
I like it. And, I like Anthony Richardson more than some folks. I know you're, as a former GM, you have your concerns about bringing in an incredibly athletic player who doesn't have a lot in the way of experience, and that's a huge gamble in the first round. But the good news, Rick, is that Seattle has 2 first-round picks. And I've talked to teams that think that Anthony Richardson should go somewhere in the bottom third of the first round unless some team gets really crazy and gambles on him earlier, in which case the Seahawks could get him at 20, where they currently sit based on their draft ordering before we start the playoffs here. So if they get a defensive player up top and then maybe move around a little bit in the draft board and move up a few spots if they need to get Anthony Richardson, I'm all on board with that because, number one, Geno is going to be a free agent in a few weeks, so they're going to have to re-sign him, and I think he makes the most sense in the near term. But you're right, he's 32. He blossomed late, and we saw that with much it was fun to watch this season, but is he going to be playing 5 or 6 or 7 years from now? That's the question. So, look, man, I love the idea of the Anthony Richardson. I've been a huge Anthony Richardson fan going back to the fall, but the tape is at times exciting and at other times concerning. So that's the math that the Seahawks or any other NFL team will have to do when they decide whether or not they're going to draft Anthony Richardson in round 1.
Rick, we've got about 30 seconds, so I need quick from you. What about Will Levis in that spot?
Yeah, I think they'll look at Will Levis too, but there's so much to go in this pre-draft process, the psychological tech, and you want to just make sure they have what it takes not only on the field, but what it takes off the field to be a NFL quarterback.
Former GM Rick Spielman, NFL draft expert Ryan Wilson breaking down Ryan's latest mock as the first 18 picks are now set. And of course, for more discussion about this, be sure you're listening to With the First Pick. Download and follow.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.